This is Jeffrey Sacks, editor of Tradition. We're delighted to share this recording of a talk by Dr. Erica Brown, delivered through Yeshiva University's Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership, commemorating the recent 50th yahrzeit of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Erica speaks about her essay in Tradition's special issue on the intellectual legacy of Rabbi Sacks. The essay, titled Staying Alive, The Dangers of Leadership, is open access at traditiononline.org. Erica examines the theme of leadership in a variety of Rabbi Sacks's works, exploring both his methodology and how to situate his thinking within the broader academic discipline of leadership. Rabbi Sacks focused on how to inspire and motivate lay and professional leaders within the Jewish community. To that end, he distilled his wisdom into 7 principles of leadership, which reflected the dilemmas and crises that he faced during his own tenure as Chief Rabbi and the lessons that he learned in overcoming those challenges. Dr. Erica Brown, consulting editor of Tradition, serves as a Vice Provost at Yeshiva University and is the founding director of its Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership.
Welcome to the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership. We started this center through the generosity of Terry and Andrew Herenstein in 2022, and really the purpose of the center is to help students find their passion and their purpose through undergraduate and graduate cohort programs. We stress character, leadership, innovation, and impact. We provide professional development opportunities for communal leaders, seminars for educators, online program for alumni, and beautiful people like you and the community at large. We have lectures and publications and literary initiatives. I'm very happy to announce, as of today, we announced the Sacks Book Prize. The 2025 winner is Ambassador Daniel Taub for his book Beyond Dispute, Rediscovering the Jewish Art of Constructive Disagreement. And our finalists are Sarah Hurwitz, As a Jew, Reclaiming Our Story from Those Who Blame, Shame, and Try to Erase Us, and Mark Shapiro for his new book on Rav Kook, Renewing the Old, Sanctifying the New, The Unique Vision of Rav Kook. So we hope you'll pick up those books, read them, enjoy them. They represent, in many ways, echoes of Rabbi Sacks in his eloquence, his elegance, his relevance of reading, and his accessibility. Tonight, we mark the 5th yahrzeit. It's really quite hard to believe, and I'm going to try to do this and not get verklempt. I've been talking about Rabbi Sacks pretty incessantly this past week in preparation. It's hard to believe that it has been 5 years, and I wanted to share an observation, and feel free to cascade any thoughts that you have on this moment or remembering when you heard that he died. And I wrote this the week after his Shiva. Sometimes the week after Shiva is the hardest. It's when we begin to think of how to inch slowly beyond grief, but find that it seems increasingly difficult. I did not sit Shiva for Rabbi Sacks. I was only his student. But this past week, he's occupied a lot of my conscious and subconscious thought. His death took me back in time to the years I spent in England during Rabbi Sacks's meteoric rise to leadership and all that I learned from him directly and indirectly. And I don't know if you remember, but that Saturday night was the American election results. It was, and that was twinned with this sort of loss of this global figure of faith. And I said I needed the majestic insight of Rabbi Sacks to figure out the spiritual implications of an American house divided, of a nation filled with gratuitous hate, and a society riven with illness and isolation. And suddenly at 72, he was gone. Anyone here, besides me, watch the funeral? It was live streamed. Anyone want to share? I'm interested in someone else's thoughts. I have my own thoughts about watching a funeral for him online. I don't remember. Jane, do you want to share anything?
I remember his daughter speaking,
how
you felt his presence in her, and you just felt the loss for the family so much when she talked about him. It was just so eloquent. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a beautiful, beautiful speaker. And there was something perhaps unintentionally very intimate about having your family and your closest people there to mourn to mourn in that setting. Any other thoughts on watching the funeral? Yeah, Terry, please. So nice to see
It
you.
was so interesting because I thought the opposite, that this great leader of ours, that we just couldn't go and honor him in the proper way, that there couldn't be thousands of people there. And I was just sad about that he didn't
Yeah,
get the kavod that he so deserved.
yeah. So I had the first thought. I've sort of tried to train myself to, because I had exactly your thought. I just couldn't believe that so few people, I mean, the whole world honored him, right? The whole world relied on him for his, what I always call a prophetic moral voice. And here you feel like it was COVID, it was November, it was cold, it was dreary, and somehow you felt that all of his light was not going to be evident in that setting. And I wrote, for the Jewish community worldwide, Jonathan Sacks was the closest we got to royalty, a spiritual aristocrat with a regal bearing who inspired with his repeated calls for hope. When he stepped down as Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth in 2013, he informally became the Chief Rabbi to English-speaking Jewish communities across the globe. And I think that in many ways has intensified because so many of his books, subsequent to his death at 72, have become available in multiple languages. He has taken off in Hebrew. Copies of a chapter on Jewish identity were translated into Hebrew from a letter in the scroll and sent to the front lines during the post October 7th. And it's so interesting to see how far his work has traveled. But I was thinking in specific about a passage in the Talmud. Maybe some of you have come across it. It's in the Babylonian Talmud in Sota. And it says there, when Rabbi Meir died, the composers of fable ceased. When Ben Azai died, diligent students disappeared. When Rabbi Yeshua died, goodness ceased from the world. When Rabbi Akiva died, the glory of the Torah ceased. And it's a whole page of what happens when you lose someone. Now, is it true that all of Torah study died? Is it true that all of storytelling died? Is it true? Or is this a way that the Talmud says it's almost as if this voice, this essential voice that we needed that became expert at in a particular scholarly discipline or in a particular way of relating to the world that we needed not only for scholarship but to role model for us in the world how to be, has suddenly disappeared. And I think we've all had moments like that. And so tonight I want to share one particular arena which I think has died since Rabbi Sacks has died. And that's a lot of the writing and the thinking he did on leadership that I can only imagine would have continued and grown had he lived to take us through the end of COVID. And I know that his advice and his guidance and his moral clarity would have been so important post October 7th. How to think, how to hope, how to extricate oneself from despair, which I'm sure many of you feel as I do. And I was intrigued, since I've been writing about leadership for a long time, when Rabbi Sacks actually started to care about leadership. When was it that he started his writing on leadership and it started appearing and people started paying a lot of attention? Because Rabbi Sacks is a philosopher, is a student of Bernard Williams in Cambridge, and an ethicist. So a lot of the work that he did was in ethics. Now, leadership, one could say, I mean, it's wonderful if leaders are ethical, but in many ways, leadership takes place when situations are ambiguous and morals are cloudy. We're not really sure what direction to take. And so when I was asked to contribute to a volume, I don't know if you can see this, 'cause it's the tradition volume, and the article will be, thank you, Eliza, for putting it in the chat. And this beautiful volume about the intellectual legacy of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks just came out in the fall of 2025. And so I partnered with Tradition, where I serve as a consultant editor, to write an article. And my friend, Rabbi Jeff Sacks, said, well, what do you want to write about? And when it comes to Rabbi Sacks, what can you not write about? There's just so much, 40 books, so many articles, so many different themes that appeared in his writings. And I chose leadership because I think I really appreciate what he was trying to do. and what inspired him to write the way that he wrote about leadership and what his process was. So that was what I investigated. It took about 6 months of working on the piece, and because my name begins with a B, I was the first article in the volume. I guess there were no A's before me, and I want to share some of his thinking on leadership, and we're going to start with probably the most popular thing that's sort of easy. It's always nice when you start with a softball, and that was Seven Principles of Jewish Leadership, and that appeared in 2012. It appeared in a number of different settings. This is on the Sacks Legacy page, and I really do want to give a shout out to our partners in Sacks Legacy, who've really done a yeoman's job in popularizing Rabbi Sacks's writing, in creating educational curricula, and doing global work, Global Day of Learning, and their new. I can't even share this with you and show it to you because it's in my box in shul, and that is the new Chumash. Really, such a magisterial work of his thinking about the parsha, and very, very beautiful. The 5 books. So that has just come out. So here's the 7 principles of leadership. And he was asked to write the foreword to a publication being produced by the Adam Science Foundation. Now, Adam Science actually was a close personal friend. He was my husband's roommate in Carmel College in high school. And Adam Science died at 28. He was in a car accident. And this was to mark the 20th anniversary of its leadership program. So for me, this year at site reminds me of that. And 27. He died in 1927. So he says the phrase Jewish leadership is ambiguous. So that's going to be our question for tonight is, how does Rabbi Sacks help us navigate the ambiguity of Jewish leadership? It's leadership by Jews, but it also means leadership in a Jewish way. Are there Jewish principles and values that inform our leadership? And of course, you know that he's going to say yes to that. He says it's his privilege to be a witness to both. So his first is about taking responsibility. Now, Rabbi Sacks, when he collected all of his essays in Covenant Conversation on leadership, he put them together in one volume, and I studied that particular volume for similar themes. And leadership begins with taking responsibility. Responsibility is the theme again and again. Rabbi Sacks was a believer that we all have choice, and we have autonomy, we have moral autonomy. And when something is going wrong, you can step away or you can lean in. And so he would use the word responsibility. I wish I actually had a Word document so I could count how many times he uses the word responsibility in lessons of leadership, but it's like a drumbeat for him. Moses is the character he most identifies with in the book, and whose stories he most tells. Now, it's true that Moses's character developed right from birth to death. And that's true for many biblical characters. We meet many people when they're born. Let's take Joseph, for example, and we travel with this story from birth to death. But that takes one book. With Moshe, we're really going through multiple biblical books, and so we're swept up in that drama. And Moshe is continuously taking responsibility, even for things he's not responsible for. And by the way, if I were to stop the share and ask you by a show of hands, how many of you feel that you take responsibility for things that aren't really within your aegis or rubric or domain? I would imagine that a lot of you who take leadership roles would raise a hand, right? And as you see what you have to do, but part of responsibility is the capacity to constantly observe, witness, and see where things are falling down, where someone's missing, where something is missing, and say, what can I do? Because it's not enough to notice. It's the noticing and the acting that makes a heroic figure like Moshe. So Moshe is constantly taking responsibilities, and look at what he says here at the end. At the heart of Judaism are 3 beliefs about leadership: we're free, we're responsible, and together we can change the world. And I just want to interrogate the last part of this for a moment, because I'm interested. Please, you can drop in the chat, or you can unmute and share with me. I think all of us would say, yeah, we are free, we're responsible, together we can change the world. And then take a pause, because I think the world has changed a great deal since Rabbi Sacks's death in 2020. And I think in some way, some of us may feel that the world has betrayed us, and it's very hard to continue to be engaged in the work of Tikkun Olam, of repairing the broader world, when the broader world has turned its back to the Jews. Anyone else sharing this, struggling with this, thinking about this, wishing Rabbi Sacks were here to ask this? Anyone want to? You can just, I can't see you, so you can just, you can drop in the chat if you'd like to say something. But it's also okay if you just want to listen. So and I think that one of the things that's our responsibility is to pass on to the next generation of emerging leaders the notion that we have restored our responsibility to change the world, and we do believe that we can do it together, even when it's difficult, and maybe especially when it's difficult. It's not up to us to retreat or withdraw from that responsibility. So the second principle is no one can lead alone. And if you're familiar with Rabbi Sacks's writing, loneliness was a very important theme for him, particularly at the end of his life. In his last book, Morality, which came out in 2020, he has a whole chapter on loneliness. He was intrigued that the UK had a minister of loneliness, Japan has a minister of loneliness. He brought a lot of demographic and sociological studies to show about the pervasive breakdown, particularly the breakdown of the family and the community. And one of his, I think, great acts of leadership was joining together in a multi-faith commitment with colleagues and friends like the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Dalai Lama, to really make the case for faith, and make the case for faith not only because of belief in God, but to say we need people to feel inspired by their faith commitments, to still feel hopeful and optimistic, and to work together and to fight social injustices. So I think this idea of no one can lead alone was important in partnership. And we're going to see in a few minutes that it was important in the process of his own leadership as chief rabbi. I want to trace this back to, I just spoke in my own synagogue on, I gave a tribute to Rabbi Sacks between the afternoon and the evening service, Mincha Mariv. And I spoke about what I think is one of the most fundamental and core axiomatic principles in Rabbi Sacks's thinking. And that is this matter of a prisoner cannot set himself free from prison. This is a Talmudic principle. It appears in a lot of places in Rabbi Sacks. Now that I've told you, you might find it easily. You'll notice that he keeps slipping in this principle. One thing that he shared later on in his life in an interview, mostly in interviews, but it appears in writing, is an incident that he had when he was on honeymoon with his wife, Lady Elaine, in Italy. He was out swimming, and he was drowning. He fell under, I think it was 5 times, and he raised his hand, sort of reaching out to hope that someone saw him. Someone saw him and rescued him. And I think actually, I don't know this, it's my speculation, that experience of him being saved by another person, when you're a person of such immense intellect and capability and talent, and yet you realize you cannot save yourself. When it comes down to it, we are fragile, we're vulnerable, and sometimes we're in situations where only the hand of another is going to free us. And that became part of his thinking in so many areas, around covenants, around marriage, around family, around communities. No one can lead alone, because and we can't live alone either. Principle 3, leadership is about the future, right? Always the signs and wonders. I love this line, gives all of us faith as we age, that Moshe's greatest leadership act occurs in the last month of his life, when he gathers people together on the bank of the Jordan and delivers the speeches that constitute the book of Deuteronomy. His eyes turn to the furthest horizon of the future. And what a beautiful image, is instead of saying, oh, the ageism that we face, and we're sort of nearing the end, we're in the last chapter, we're being eclipsed by young people who think differently or behave differently than we do. And here he's saying, no, maybe you haven't actually gotten to the place where you're going to do your real leadership work. Maybe all of this is just preparation for something big that you're going to do sometime in the future. And he says before you can lead, you have to have a vision of the future and be able to communicate it to others. Leaders learn. That was very important to him. And in fact, Rabbi Sacks, and in the process that I mentioned of his own leadership, Rabbi Sacks in his staff meetings would learn together with his employees. He would learn together, and when he had a problem in leadership, he would intellectualize it through the Torah. Now, many of us problematize things and then intellectualize them because it's sort of easier to stay in the world of ideas than actual real people. And I'm intrigued by the way that he sort of kept pressing on special Jewish texts to yield answers for leadership conundra that he was experiencing in the moment. And one of the things I think that's so important is without constant study, leadership lacks direction and depth. I think we all know this in Jewish organizations, in Jewish communal life, that unfortunately literacy or Jewish literacy can be very, very shallow. We can we can become presidents of organizations and know very, very little about sacred Jewish texts, about Hebrew, about Jewish history. And, I see some of you, you wonderful educators on this screen, you know what I'm talking about. And anytime you have, people in your class, I've been privileged to teach many leaders through the Wexner Foundation and through my work at Yeshiva University, this incredible potency that texts have when people are leading. And they think to themselves, how is it that I thought I could lead an organization and not encounter these remarkable stories, the Abraham of the world, the Esther of the world, the Ruth of the world? So this helps me become a better leader. Leadership means believing in the people you lead. And actually, I'm going to add a postscript to this. When Moshe called the people mordim, you rebels, I think that was the beginning of the end. Certainly that was when God said, you can no longer lead, someone else will succeed you and you're not going into the land. Because when you start making fun or belittling the people you lead, you're done. You're over. You don't see their distinctiveness, their uniqueness. You don't accord them the dignity that they deserve. Principle 6, leadership involves a sense of timing and pace, and leadership is stressful and emotionally demanding. He cites this, and this is going to be my takeoff point. So I know that you could have read any of this yourself. It's easy to just go online and read it yourself, but I actually want to hone in on this principle in other writings of his. So, Rabbi Sacks, his leadership lessons in leadership was published as a collection in 2015. All those essays were written in 2013 and 2014, and that was the theme for his leadership series. Now, before 2013, he started to write about leadership. We have one. I don't have any identifying details, but I was given this by Rabbi Michael Leitner, who works in Rabbi Sacks's archives, an article called 4 Views of Leadership. But he retired on June 12th, 2012. His lessons in leadership were written in 2013, 2014, and the collection was published in 2015. Now, what this tells me is there was a lot of processing to do when he finished being the chief rabbi. He was able to, maybe with some freedom and some hindsight, look back at what he had faced. Sometimes we're all in this. We're stuck in the moment. I'm going to stop my share. We're stuck in, a moment, and there's so much urgency and sometimes crisis in the moment that we really can't. It's very, very hard to think. It's very hard to put ideas together and to actually discuss what it is that we've just been through. And a year before he retired, he was in conversation with Ron Heifetz, who was an important leadership figure for him. We'll talk a little bit more about Ron Heifetz. And they were in conversation, and he was asked, Rabbi Sacks was asked by Ron Heifetz, the classic question, whether leaders are born or made, and advice he had for a successor and wisdom for leaders more generally. And Rabbi Sacks quipped, and he said, Moses' refusal to lead 4 times in the book of Exodus demonstrated that he truly was the greatest prophet of all time because he knew exactly what he was in for. So, and again, that he makes that comment as he's leaving the chief rabbinate. It happens, and I want to share as we proceed, and I share some notes from this article, which you're welcome to read in full. I very, very often am privileged to get emails or telephone conversations from business leaders who tell me how important his principles are, or actually are running their business according to Rabbi Sacks' 7 principles. So that really is very, very moving for me, because it's not only that he intellectualized his own leadership career, but that in intellectualizing it and sharing it, this is living Torah. So I'm going to read to you something he writes in the introduction to Lessons in Leadership. And if you have this book and you read this and you did not gasp, I asked myself, how did I not gasp the first time I saw this? I must have just been speed reading and not really thought about what this meant. So this is what he writes. It was during one of the worst crises of my life that I first discovered the work of Ronald Hafetz and Marty Linsky at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. One sleepless night, I was surfing the pages of a well-known internet bookshop when I came across a book entitled Leadership on the Line. It was the subtitle that caught my eye, Staying Alive Through the Dangers of Leading. This sounded radically unlike any book on the subject I'd ever encountered. The others seemed to say that leadership means seeing the path ahead and inspiring others to follow. None had used words like danger. None had hinted that you might need help staying alive. Wow, what is going on? That is not like I had a little board meeting, right? And we couldn't decide, when we should have the annual, we should write an annual report. When someone says, I saw Staying Alive Through the Danger of Leadership, and I had to get the book, it's obviously because something is going on that feels subversive or dangerous or risky or incompatible with one's values, and trying to align the life that you lead as a philosopher with the life that you lead as a leader is really complex. It's complex and demanding. And I want to start off with one of the first demands that I think really was for him an issue of urgency. A person who worked closely with Rabbi Sacks, and I'm delighted to say that I work with a number of them, said that when he was chief rabbi, he struggled, as do most high achievers, with time management, with aligning public expectations with his understanding of what a chief rabbi should be and the leadership models he learned from the Tanakh. He had a preference to work alone, as is common for academics. But guess what? When you're the chief rabbi, you cannot work alone, right? There are a lot of people that you work with. He knew that he needed to be collaborative to create and execute a communal vision. And he came in with what he termed a decade of renewal. He wanted, in the first 10 years of his chief rabbinate, he wanted to absolutely shift everything about Anglo Jewry. He saw community dying. He saw schools that were ineffective. He saw synagogues that were large buildings with very few congregants. He saw many of the best and the brightest making Aliyah. London, England's not far from Israel. He saw that if he didn't do something that involved risk, that also involved danger, that this community that had nurtured him would not likely be a community for his children and for others. So he begins this process of renewal. For those of you who are interested, and if anyone wants to pop this into the chat, I just can't do it while I'm teaching. But Rabbi Sacks, when he finished the chief rabbinate after 22 years, wrote I think it's about 28 or 31 pages. It's called A Judaism Engaged with the World. And it's his reflections, his legacy, his Dvarim, if you like, his Sefer Dvarim for the community. And he said they were so successful at renewal that the opposite problem was the case. People were becoming too parochial. They weren't thinking about the world at large, because the Jewish community was thriving. Always a sign for Jews of how thriving you are is What? How many restaurants do you have in your city? I don't know why this is like, it's as if people ate out every night. I don't know why. I listen, Beth Epstein is here, Milk Street Cafe. Mwah. But you know, am I right? Am I right? Right? Oh, the community is amazing. We have so many restaurants. I'm like, what about schools? What about shuls? What about libraries? What about a Beit Midrash? But restaurants. Okay. So London and the UK generally became a much more Jewishly enriched place, and he sort of had to not backtrack, but remind people that they still had to care about the world. So anyway, time management. For him, this was urgent because he used his time so well. In fact, I have to share with you, and I took 30 students last year to in the footsteps of Rabbi Sacks to London to meet with people who had worked with him, to meet with Lady Elaine and Gila, and to go to his kever, which was very moving and very difficult. And we met actually his driver, and his driver wanted to tell us things about him. And one of the things that his driver said is that he never wore shoes with laces because he did not want to waste time tying his shoes. So that's a person who uses time effectively. But it became very, very difficult because when you're used to being alone, and collaboration takes time and people take time. When you're alone, you can write what you want, you can think what you want. When you're with other people, you have to be gracious, and you also, in order to have buy-in, you need to bring other people in. So I want to actually read you something that I found as I was researching this article. In a 1992 interview for the journal Hashkiva of the Rabbinical Council of the Provinces serving Jewish communities outside of London, he was asked about coping with the multifaceted demands of his office. First, he spoke more generally about Jewish approaches to time management, and then is quoted as saying, I spend a not inconsiderable amount of time in the chief rabbinate sitting with my personal assistant and my executive director, discussing how we should allocate time in the next 6 months, and which is constantly revised. In the same interview, he talks about devising a system for planning ahead for 18 months to decide what to prioritize on a day-to-day basis, advising readers to do the same. Wow. You thought this week was a lot, right? It's like, imagine now you're going, in order for me to use my time well, I need to make an 18-month spread of activities and triage my time and prioritize. I don't want this to make anyone neurotic or upset, but I think when you are in the presence of greatness, and people say, oh, like everybody's a person, they're like this and I'm like this, and there are people who lead very different lives because they have a very different sense of discipline, and they have a very different sense of ambition and mission. And so for me, the more I learned about his time management, the more I understood how much of his own life he sacrificed on behalf of the Jewish community. So Hafetz actually wrote the foreword for Lessons in Leadership, and this is how he described what Rabbi Sacks was doing with leadership. He says, Sacks provides us with profound insight in this fundamental question of leadership. How can an individual with a grant of authority, human or divine, maintain the self-discipline to focus on the very hard work of developing collective capacity rather than succumb to the temptation of generating perpetual dependency? That is a major theme in Hafetz and Linsky's writing, which is that people, when you're a leader, people will want you to take away their independence and their autonomy. They vote for you so you can make decisions for them, so that you can blame them when things don't work out, so that you can escape from responsibility, or to Eric Fromm's point, escape from freedom. And it was, we willingly, volitionally escape from our own freedoms because we put our decision making onto a leader. So for Hafetz, he was paying very careful attention to how Rabbi Sacks could both lead and encourage independence in others, which is a very fine space to be in. Now, to that point, one of the main themes that Rabbi Sacks has, and that's what I spent a lot of time looking at in this book, Leadership, Lessons in Leadership, is how do you manage failure? How do you manage failure? How do you manage problems? How do you manage transgression, authenticity, inauthenticity. And I just want to share with you like a little skim of essay titles in the book, because I think it tells you a lot about this issue of staying alive, what he actually found dangerous. On Vayetze, it's called his essay is called "Light in Dark Times." There's one surviving failure. There's one overcoming setbacks. There's one how leaders fail. There's the sins of a leader, on not trying to be what you are not, on conflict resolution, leadership at a time of crisis, against hate. As Rabbi Sacks understood that if you were really going to lead, you were going to see the community at its lowest. You were going to see behavior that was not always admirable. You were going to, it wasn't only a matter of observation, you had to shift the culture. Wait, let me see what Debbie is saying. Hello, Debbie. So nice to see you. Oh, look at all this nice stuff that's going on here. Man has no greater anxiety than rid himself of this great gift of freedom. Yes, yes, so true. Other things that Rabbi Sacks said, just sort of, I took sentences out that were very memorable to me that sort of perpetuated this theme of it's kind of dangerous to lead. Leaders suffer crises, bad things happen, and when they do, the leader must take the strain so that others can sleep easily in their beds. Imagine saying, I'm going to be the sacrificial lamb. I'm not going to be able to sleep so that you can sleep. Leadership, even of the very highest order, is often marked by failure. Leaders make mistakes. That is not an occupational hazard. That is an occupational hazard of the role. Whatever malice other people harbor against leaders, and the more successful they are, the more malice there is. If they can say, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, which is what Joseph said to his brothers, they will survive, their strength intact, their energy undiminished. All leaders have their moments of exhaustion. At such times, a leader needs support. And of course, the question is, was he writing about himself? And I think in many ways he was. I think he was trying to understand some of the difficulties that he was facing through an intellectual and spiritual lens. Now, when I say difficulties, I want to talk about a few of them. One of them, one of his most difficult moments as chief rabbi was when he published The Dignity of Difference. I have a first edition copy. In The Dignity of Difference, he talked about the fact that other faiths have their own path to God. He did not say that Judaism is the only path. And for that, he was criticized roundly by ultra-Orthodox members of, they weren't, the chief rabbinate was not over ultra-Orthodox congregations, but there were obviously, those were Jews who he felt a responsibility to, and he felt a responsibility to maintain Jewish unity. And they pressed him hard about this, and he ended up actually retracting some of the sentences in that book, and then it was reprinted. And so that was a time of despair. I want to say in 2006. Wait, I want to get this right. Hold on. Let me look at my footnote. In 1996, he did not attend the funeral service of the well-known leader and rabbi of Britain's reform movement, Hugo Gryn. A private letter was leaked to the press where he condemned Gryn for destroying the faith. When trying to mitigate the anger directed at him by members of non-Orthodox denominations by attending a memorial service for Gryn, he provoked the ire of some in the ultra-Orthodox movement. He was unable to satisfy either the right or the left, and this made it to The Guardian, right? Lord Sacks, two sides of the chief rabbi. Now, I want to just say as a postscript to this, Gryn's widow insisted in a public letter that there was no Hugo Gryn affair and that she enjoyed warm relations with the chief rabbi. But there were moments when you're in the public, when whatever decision you make, you're going to make someone unpopular. And I think that was very hard for a person who really saw leadership as a chance to inspire, and particularly to inspire unity. You cannot make everyone happy, and some people will go at you. And it's hard to know. It's hard to know how to, it's always easy for other people to comment and critique a leader when they're not in the leader's shoes. And I want to just share something that he wrote about his public duties. I discovered the difference between the public face that leaders must always show, bold, confident, unshakable, and the private face, when a leader is no longer on display and can share his or her feelings with friends. That is when you realize that even the great leaders have their doubts and hesitations. They have their moments of depression and near despair, and they are all the more human for it. And towards the end of his life, Rabbi Sacks was quite honest about his own depression. When his father died, he spent 2 years depressed. He wrote about it. I think he saw the responsibility to let other people know that a mental health crisis it's almost it's almost inevitable when you're a person who thinks a great deal and is carrying a great deal of stress. I'll just share with you. The first year he was chief rabbi, I had already left London, and I studied under him when he was not yet chief rabbi. And I met him somewhere, and I said, Rabbi Sacks, how's it going? What are you reading? Because I was always interested in whatever he was reading. And he said, reading? Erica, I can't read. I have to have salmon dinners, right? In other words, he understood that he was giving up something very personal and that he trained for in his own academic life. And that required a rehab, right? A rehabilitation of, or that's not even the right word, a reframing of your mission. I want to actually just stop here. If anyone, I've been talking way too long. I'm not used to that. Questions, thoughts? Let's make this a little conversation. Or not. I know a lot of you like to talk, but no, everyone's quiet now. All right. I am going to, I want to, hold on, I want to read one other thing for you. And this is actually something that I thought a lot about, which is, let's see, Debbie said he had to shift and change his perspective. Yeah, not only your perspective, but actually what you do in your everyday life, right? If you spend, his brother Alan Sacks claims that he read a book a day. If you read a book a day, that's you can't do that, right? You gotta put the books to the side. And what makes this also staggering is how prolific Rabbi Sacks was as a writer and as a researcher, despite the fact that he was also, he also had this public role. So Rabbi Sacks, if you're a leader and you're looking, you're saying, I want to buy a book to help me with policy governance, you're not going to find it in Rabbi Sacks. If you say, I'd like, he addresses conflict management and conflict resolution, but he's not giving you any practical takeaways. There is no toolbox for Rabbi Sacks. So I started, as I was, I would say I read leadership books so you don't have to, because there's a lot of them out there and a lot of them are garbagey and popular, and every CEO has to write a leadership book. And yet some of them conceptually are amazing. And Rabbi Sacks actually was not interested in any of those practical dimensions of leadership. So it took me a while to figure out, given that he's not really dealing with broad leadership constructs, he's not citing outside of Hafetz and Linsky, he barely cites another leadership writer. He's mostly just working with the Torah. What is he actually doing in terms of leadership? Could we figure out what it is? And I'm gonna uh, share one sentence from the book, from Lessons in Leadership, that I think is the key to his thinking about this. It is the task of a leader to empower, but it's also his or her task to inspire. So I think he saw that there were many people who could make a budget. There were people who could be involved in project management, who could create events. What his skill set was inspiring other people. Now you might say, yeah, but you need all those practical things. But if you have all those practical things and you cannot inspire people, you're not going to move them to go from one place to the other. And if you say to yourself, okay, I want to be an inspiring leader, what should I open? you should open this book, because he teaches you how to look at a text through a very different lens, right? Instead of looking at, let's say, classical commentators, he's trying to say, how does Moses, or I'll take Joseph, how does Joseph establish himself as a credible leader when he keeps being thrown in the pit, right? When he keeps being, when he keeps facing these challenges. So part of this is saying, as a leader, your job is to look for inspiration everywhere. Imagine you were, you're the president of a school board, or you're the CEO of a company, and you keep a little notebook, or you have your phone, and every time something inspiring happens, you make a little note, and then you think to yourself, who could I share this with? In what context could I share this? Who needs to know this powerful moment? And I'm going to give you one. Um, on Simchat Torah, two amazing things happen. One is, as I was walking out of shul, I saw a man on the other, I saw a friend on the other side of the crosswalk, and he was just standing, not crossing the street. So I walked over and I said, do you need me to help you cross the street? Is everything okay? And he said, turn around, Erica. Look over there. And it was a person who was obviously a Christian, who was standing in front of each hostage poster on the fence of the synagogue and saying a prayer and then crossing himself. And now imagine all the chaos that's going on in Simchat Torah inside, the dancing with the Torah, the kids running around with candy. Here's this beautiful, soulful person who's trying to honor each hostage and just came there just to do that. So when you think about that, as you experience a story that's inspiring and you say, I'm going to put this in some mental space because I need to share this with other people, because all of us experience the opposite, which is a world that is harsh and unforgiving, where people are often unkind, where we're the subject of hate. And so sometimes you say, well, the world actually is a really special place, and it has lots of beauty, and it has lots of majesty, and it has lots of sparkling moments. And I think that was really Rabbi Sacks's great skill, was being able to look at life and look at text and look at his reading, and always ask, what can I do to inspire other people? And I'll tell you why it's particularly important. In many places, and in the principles of leadership, he cites this very difficult, despondent moment in Moshe's leadership, and the sort of the black dog, as Churchill would say, in Bamidbar Yud Aleph in Numbers 11, where Moshe says to God, why have you brought evil on your servant? Why have I failed to find favor in your eyes, that you placed the burden of this whole people on me? Did I conceive of them? Did I birth them? That you should say to me, carry it in your lap as a nurse carries a baby? Where can I find meat to give this whole people? I can't carry this people on my own. It's too heavy for me. If this is what you're doing to me, then I've not found favor in your eyes. Kill me now and let me not look upon my own evil. In other words, this is the low moment of despair. What's Rabbi Sacks going to do with it? So this is what he says. This, for me, is the benchmark of despair. Whenever I felt unable to carry on, I would read this passage and think, if I haven't yet reached this point, I'm okay. Somehow the knowledge that the greatest Jewish leader of all time had experienced this depth of darkness was empowering. It said that the feeling of failure does not necessarily mean that you have failed. All it means is that you have not yet succeeded. And when you read something like that, and you're in your own dark, low moment, and you're thinking, I don't know, the world is just such a hard place. And you think, oh, if I haven't yet reached this point, I'm okay. And he was very aware of needing to articulate the low point and then climbing out of it. He says leaders have a public face that is usually calm, upbeat, optimistic, and relaxed. But behind the facade, we can all experience storms of emotion as we realize how deep are the divisions between people, how intractable are the problems we face, and how thin the ice on which we stand. Perhaps we all experience such moments at some point in our lives when we know where we are and where we want to be, but simply cannot see a route from here to there. That is the prelude to despair. Notice, he does not write this in the third person. He says we, and often he says I. He wants you to know that he's writing from his own story, and that you can trust him with your own feelings because he has been there himself. Um, and and I actually I want to share and conclude with an idea that I think really had a great impression on Rabbi Sacks, although he does not say this directly, but I'm going to glean it. The rabbis, Ron Hafetz and Marty Linsky, in their book Leadership on the Line, wrote about the real difficulty of leadership. And I want to read it to you because I think about this so often, and I think about it in relation to Rabbi Sacks. The most difficult work of leadership, they write, involves learning to experience distress without numbing yourself. The virtue of a sacred heart lies in the courage to maintain your innocence and wonder, your doubt and curiosity, and your compassion and love, even through moments of despair. Leading with an open heart means you could be at your lowest point, abandoned by your people and entirely powerless, yet remain receptive to the full range of human emotions without going numb, striking back, or engaging in some other defense. And I say that because one of the things, if you've ever taken a leadership role, what's the first thing someone tells you? They put their arm around you after you've said yes, right? But after you've said yes, and they say, you're going to have to develop a thick skin, right? You're going to have to develop a thick skin. How many times have we heard this? You can hear it in your professional life, in your personal life, as a parent. And that is exactly the opposite of what Hafetz and Linsky say. In other words, the trick is maintaining a sacred heart. It's not overcoming this difficulty or this challenge. It's remaining alive to the full range of emotions while you're actually leading. And that, they said, is the core of that is developing this, what they call this sacred heart. And I think that was probably extremely important for Rabbi Sacks in his lower moments of leadership, is not to take the old wisdom or the myth that you should toughen that exterior and make it calloused so that you don't feel anything. Because once you stop feeling things, then empathy goes, then compassion goes, then sensitivity goes. And if all those things go, you're not leading from your heart, and you're certainly not leading from your Jewish values. And I think that was something that Rabbi Sacks, that was his gift to us, is saying that you can teach yourself to be inspiring. And the way that you do that is through maintaining a sacred heart through the most difficult of times, through allowing other people to see your fragility, we'll call it edited authenticity. You don't share everything, but you share something so that people understand that you can experience pain, articulate pain, and go through crisis and still stay the course. And I get sad sometimes when I think about how many people don't step into roles of Jewish leadership because they think, oh, people are going to criticize and people are going to write about me and I'm going to be in a Facebook post and I don't want to deal with the complaints and then you say to yourself, but there's something noble and there's a gift that you're not giving the world. Thank you, right? Let people see your humanity, and it helps them maintain their humanity. I think that we're in an age where humanity is hard to see. We don't want to show that fragility. We'd rather ghost someone or cancel someone than say, and then lead with nuance and lead with empathy and lead with openness. And that's really what I'm thinking about on this yurt site is, and perhaps that's why I ultimately chose to think about leadership, because if you were moved by Rabbi Sacks in his lifetime, and if you've been moved by his work since then perhaps you'll be willing to step into a role of leadership, in his honor, right? Saying he inspired me to face sometimes the difficulty of leading, with the urgency of leading, and know that that we will go through difficult times. That's all over his book. It was he's not hiding the issues. He's actually saying, oh, the Torah didn't hide these issues. Let's sit and learn Torah together, and you'll see that if you can still hold on, and you can transcend this in some way, elevate yourself above the earthly things and hold on to the transcendence, you can get to that very, very special and holy place. So it's really a blessing and a privilege to continue his work through promoting his teaching, and more than promote his teaching is to help in his ultimate goal, which was to get everyone to learn and everyone to lead. I think, Panina, you have a question. How do you strike the balance between lack of self-awareness, right, inability to admit fault, and too much self-deprecation as a leader? And it's, wow, what a $64,000 question that is. He speaks a great deal about humility in leadership, and I think that certainly you can find that in him. When he had already left the chief rabbinate and he had quote unquote retired, I saw him at an education conference, and he was busy every minute. I said, Rabbi Sacks, you told me that you were going to retire. And he said, I wanted to. Hashem didn't let me, right? In other words, there was a sense like your mission doesn't stop. But I think part of that, he had this self-deprecating sense of humor that I think allowed him, Panina, to to be aware that to be aware of the inabilities and inadequacies, and bechozo to do it anyway. Because who is his greatest figure? Moshe, right? So Moshe was always in that position of doubting himself, but never doubting the mission. And I always wonder if Rabbi Sacks read Good to Great, because for Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, which has been one of the longest selling, best selling books in leadership, he believes that a level 5 leader is someone who has complete drive and complete humility. So knows it's drive not to be famous, it's drive not to be known, it's drive to execute a mission, and you combine that with humility, and what you get is incredible influence. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine a Jewish person who's had more influence on the world, because of course it wasn't only in the Jewish community. He really cared about multiculturalism in Britain. He cared about faith communities that weren't his own. He cared that people developed communities and let go of their loneliness. And I think he knew that he was a conduit for God's message. He was a servant. He was a servant. May we all be good servants in his memory. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. And think about what you would like to take on in your own life, in your own leadership, as a result of being touched by his. Good to see you all. Thanks so much.